record to this computer. All right. The Orwellian voice spoke. So
yes, Orwellian voice
the
spoke.
state is officially watching us, so I
Yes,
guess we can
yeah.
speak freely now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is ominous. It is
Yes.
very ominous. So I wanted to share with you and explore with you genuine dialogos about, and I've been exploring these ideas with Jordan Hall, and also with Dan Chiappi, in response to Schindler's astonishing book, Plato's Critique of Impure Reason, and then tying that back into phenomenology, especially Husserl, a little bit of Merleau-Ponty, and then trying to. So I'm going to throw out some terms, and then try and unpack how I'm seeing them coming together.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is try to disclose a deep relationship between Platonic eidos and dialogos. So eidos is usually translated as a form. It's more like the look of a thing, or as we might say today, the aspect. But I want to try and explore that a little more. But of course, the eidos became the basis for idea, which then also became our notion of thought. And so there's something shared there that I want to try and unpack. So here's what I want to do. I want to talk about a process inspired by Husserl, but I think also, and I think Husserl saw, the reason why he kept using all these Platonic terms is he saw what he was doing in very much Platonic terms. And I think that was prescient, because as we're moving to this post-propositional, the idea that Plato's thought was that it was the crux of Platonic dialogue and dialectic and dialogos is non-propositional. The phenomenological is coming back to the fore as central for understanding Plato. Okay, so here's how I want to try to do it. And instead of constantly naming, this is from Husserl and this is from Plato, this is from Merleau-Ponty, I'm just going to unfold my thinking. And if you want to pick that out and say, where did that come from?
Right.
So I've sort of tried to give credit as to the people who are informing my thought.
Yeah.
So the idea.
No pun intended. No pun intended there, right? Informing your thought.
Yeah. That's very good.
Yes.
Very good. So I want to start with, this idea, obviously from Husserl and Merleau-Ponty, about the idea that we never, we'll use vision, but it stands for all of perception. We never see the thing. And the idea is all we see is a particular look or aspect, like here's one, here's another, here's another, here's another. And nevertheless, I get a sense of my phone that is not disclosed in any look it has, any aspect, but somehow is a unity running through them. Does that? And so there's that sense. Now, if we take it as a fact that things have a combinatorial explosive nature to them, right? There's a moreness that is combinatorially explosive. There's a suchness that is specific beyond any possible, beyond any categorization. It is what is unique to that thing. Then we are led to this idea. We're led to the idea of multi-aspectuality. So instead of thinking of this as possessing sort of a finite, countable number of aspects, it actually has, a combinatorially explosive. It has an inexhaustible source of aspectuality. And then there is something running through that inexhaustible multi-aspectuality, this trans-aspectual unity.
Right. Yeah.
Which is the source of why all these aspects that are not logically identical to each other belong together. There is something in all of the aspects. And here's Plato's idea, I believe, that which unifies all the aspects cannot itself be another aspect.
Hmm.
There is something
Yeah.
trans-aspectual
Yeah.
that runs through the multi-aspectuality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that is what I think Plato meant by eidos. It's that which is behind all the looks, which
Mhm.
itself is not another look,
Mm.
but that we get,
Yeah.
right, when we are coming into an awareness or a knowledge of the thing. Is that okay so far?
Good. Good. Yes.
Okay. Now, the thing about what you can do, of course, is you can move beyond the perceptual. I can go into the imaginal. I can think of non-perception. I can't perceive them right now, but I can think of non-perceptual situations, not currently perceptual is what I should say, not currently perceptual situation. I can imaginally expand, like what an aspect of this that might be revealed if there was actually magic in this universe. What might be, right?
Yeah.
An
Yeah.
aspect revealed of this, right? Or all these different, the internet collapses, and then how does this thing change for me? So you can imaginally extend the multi-aspectuality, which means you also imaginally extend the trans-aspectual eidos.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Now, once I begin the imaginal into possibility spaces, I can then move into the conceptual extension,
Right.
the way with various concepts and abstract concepts, right? I can open this up, right?
Yeah.
So I can disclose its, in concept, sort of between imaginal and concept, its subatomic structure, or the way it could be influenced by relativistic factors, right? So all of these things are now the fact that the iron within this came from a supernova billions of years ago. So now I can open up its aspectuality, and get right, and also now further extend the trans-aspectual eidos.
Yes.
Is that okay?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Now, what I can do is now take all of those perceptual, imaginal, conceptual, and further extend them by entering into dialogos with other people, because right now we have a meta. So my trans-aspectuality extended as far as it can, yours, Chris's, Jordan's, and now we're doing this meta trans-aspectuality that is, right, so we're opening up even more into more dimensions, the multi-aspectuality, more and more, drawing out the eidos more and more and more.
Right.
So I call that process eidetic, eidos, eduction, because eduction, this is from Spearman when he talked about the basic ability to sort of grasp a pattern of intelligibility. Right?
Yeah.
So eduction is the common mother of induction, deduction, and abduction.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay,
right.
gotcha.
So it's related to education, to draw out, right? To disclose. So what I'm doing is I'm drawing out, right? So simultaneously, there's the inexhaustible multi-aspectuality now blowing up into multidimensionality.
Yeah.
And then there is also the drawing out, the eduction of the trans-aspectual, right? Eidos, the non-logical identity that somehow persists through them.
Yeah.
And then to bring in Harman's notion of how we know something by deeply kind of knowing ourselves from object-oriented ontology. So you can go back to Kant's idea that in order to perceive the unity of this, there has to be a unity of me, of the I. Kant called it the I think. There has to be a unity between all the I viewings. So the self, but notice that self is not a logical identity. Right. It's like a narrative identity. So it's this transformative identity. So simultaneous to this, right, trans-aspectual eduction of the eidos, there is also this trans-aspectual eduction of the self. And when those two are dynamically coupled, that is the meaning of Platonic conformity, of knowing by being.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not in any identity of properties between me and it's the idea.
Yeah.
It's the eidetic eduction of my selfing
Yeah.
and the eidetic eduction of the eidos,
Yeah.
right, are conformed together, are coupled, are tracking, are reciprocally opening each other up.
Right. Right. And say the last part, and that all coming together
Yeah,
in dialogos
is the
is
profound.
Platonic, that Platonic sense of knowledge is conformity.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay.
Which is very different than, and I don't know if this is a fair reading of Aristotle. Let's say it's very different from the standard reading of Aristotle's conformity theory, where it's just a structural functional organization,
Yeah.
right? Which is right in one sense, but it's not. This is not just a space. What I'm pointing to is not a spatial. It's not just. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't exclude. It's not just a temporal spatial, right? Structural
Yeah.
functional organization. It's the structural functional organization that runs through all the possible aspects, all the possible aspectualizations, right, of
Yeah.
the thing. That. So, right, it's
Yes,
not just its
yes,
spatial
yes,
structural functional organization, it's its
yes.
ontological,
Right.
and I'm coming into deep conformity with that.
Yeah. So it's like it's on one level that it is the spatial, right? And then
Yeah.
it goes, and then you can come away from that and imagine it, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then it's the imaginal, right?
Yeah.
And then you can be in possibility space,
The conceptual,
right?
yeah.
The conceptual, and in some kind is so the process of knowing, understanding, aspecting the non-logical thing going all the way through it that brings it all together, yet is beyond it, plays itself out in multiple dimensions, and that there's a similarity through all of those.
Yes.
Right. And then dialogos, when we come together,
it's just that on speed.
That on speed. So, and there's all there. You're also with the notion of not Platonic conformity. Knowledge is conformity. You're also speaking that in some sense it's over against the notion of, was it Descartes? Just to give this some more perspective, Descartes basically like took knowledge or solidified it in a sense of where before Descartes, I know you talk about it like this, before Descartes, to know was to come into conformity in some sense with what is known. So like to come in conformity with reality is the process of knowing reality. Where after Descartes, all you needed was a method, and then you can kind of know about without being changed.
Right. All you need is a method that gives you clear and distinct ideas, which are representations of the thing that somehow capture its mathematical and essential properties. It's a fundamental difference. So the clearness and distinctness, right, brings with them a sense of a completeness, a finality. And of course, that's the epitome of Descartes' notion, central epistemic notion of certainty. Certainty is, I have it. I have it. I really genuinely have it. I'm certain there's nothing missing there, right? That idea.
Yeah.
Whereas the Platonic conformity idea is one of an ongoing trajectory of transframing. You're constantly transframing, where you're both right? You're both reframing the thing and being reframed in your framing, right?
Yeah.
So the transframing, there's transformation in your framing, and there's transformation of what is framed, going like that, and that's an ongoing thing. And the sense of that always giving birth, to beyond itself, that's different. So that's a kind of trust, as opposed like the sense of being, swept up in a trajectory, which is very different, right? Think of the difference. That's a trust kind of sense, rather than a certainty kind of sense, a completion of grasping. Right. So for Plato, right, you ultimately, and I mean, this comes out in Nicholas of Cusa and of John Scotus Erigena.
Erigena.
Yeah, you never, right? You never lose Socratic ignorance. All you get is further and further learned ignorance. You're doing this education process, but you can't, and you're not blind because you know that you're on the course. You know what to care about. You know how to follow, right?
Yeah.
But you can't come to a place where, so people say, oh, well, they said that about God, that you can't, but if you read Erigena and you read Cusa, and who was I reading today? It was Dionysius. They all say, you can't do that about even an object. You can't get to the final essence of any object, because for them, that's where the thing coincides with God, with ultimate reality, right? And right. And so the idea again is to replace grasping with a living right relationship, very much like faithfulness rather than certainty. And so this is the model. And so the thing about Dialogos is, like, it takes it, like I said, it's on speed, but Dialogos allows you to trigger and activate those beings to whom we most need to extend trust, which are other people. Right?
Right.
And for whom we are most readily capable of falling in love. And so this is again the Platonic theme of, trust, love, right? Moving through.
And so the very, in some sense, the very trust, what I'm hearing you say is the trust isn't a propositional standing back, right, and assessing the past. Yet I would imagine your experience of all previous this going on all the time, in some sense, is embodied in a sense of a faith that if I move towards this in a particular way, right, it's going to blossom beyond myself, right?
Exactly. And that, so trust in going back to the etymology in the sense of troth. So to be betrothed to something, right? To be betrothed to someone, right? And another connection in that is Scary's idea about beauty and how it prepares us for truth and justice. That when you see the beautiful tree, all of the previous tree experiences are now gathered together. You're getting that multi-aspectuality, and then you realize, but you also realize, but I didn't realize trees could be like this. So there's the opening up. Right. So there's the reactivation by re-expansing, recognizing, right? That, right, the multi-aspectuality and the treeness is somehow now has to be, you have to do this sensibility transcendence on the tree in yourself. It's still a tree, but it's beyond what I thought trees could be. And that means I can perceive things that I couldn't. And that's the experience of beauty, right? And so that's why the beauty is bound up within, woven within.
So the beauty are these things coming to both simultaneously coming together.
Yes.
And going beyond at the same time. It's a coming together and going beyond itself.
When you get that simultaneity, like that stereoscopic vision of the multidimensional multi-aspectuality of this and the trans-aspectual logos that holds it all together, right? So that the explosion doesn't fragment. The explosion is beautiful, right? Very much.
Yes.
So that's what I'm thinking about right now, and you can see how I'm bringing together Husserl and Merleau-Ponty and Plato, right? And the work we're doing on Dialogos to try and get a deeper understanding of the relationship between. I wanted to move beyond the relationship between these two things because I wanted to move beyond the sterile notion of the Platonic theory of the forms and the practice of dialectic. And sort of, there's a lot of talk about these things that is stultifying and ossifying. And I wanted to break out of that and re-engage them, not just individually, but also like in relationship to each other so they could come alive.
Right. So you wanted to do the thing that you're just talking about with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
because I wanted to get at what was going on, what we saw going on,
Yeah.
and we see going on in the Platonic dialogues when we ask people to do dialectic and to dialogos about a virtue, right?
Yes. 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 Yes.
They're tracking the eidos, they're tracing out the eidos, but they
Right.
don't come to a definition
Right.
or an Aristotelian essence.
Yes. They come to a sense of, I can see it as beyond myself, but somehow I am the thing I'm seeing that's beyond myself.
Yes, they feel
Yeah.
betrothed to it. They
Yeah.
feel betrothed to it. They feel wedded to honesty or to courage in a
Yeah.
way they weren't before.
Right. So that's the, so I'm wondering about, I kept getting this sense of, as you were talking, I kept getting this sense of the I that comes out of those dialogues in some sense. It's formed and it comes out of those dialogues.
You very much.
Right.
But that's the key of participatory knowing.
Yeah.
The transformative knowing of yourself and the transformative knowing of the object of knowledge are bound together. They're inseparably mutually affording and interpenetrating and interdefining each other. That's the core of participatory knowing. You're knowing thyself and knowing the other are bound together, are wedded together.
Right. Because I've always wondered about that sense of, what's strange is, like, in some sense, those experience are so forming of oneself, yet the experiences themselves are precisely moments where oneself is nowhere to be found in some way, right?
Yeah.
So there's this quality of it's funny, I keep getting this image. Brianne and I got caught on in a kind of a binge last night on TV watching tornadoes and tornado chasers. So I keep seeing this and chasing it all around, right? And it going away. And there's this ideal place as a tornado chaser where you have to be in it with just the right, you can't be too close, otherwise you'll get killed. You can't be too far away because you'll miss it. You can't be on this side of it because you won't see it. But if you're at this perfect place, it all comes together, right? But it can go away in any second, this sense of, this is what we're always kind of doing in dialogue. In some sense, is feeling into this kind of way that we're paired up with each other. That's something happening in between where.
Okay, so I got more on that because I just published a paper with Gary Hovahenison. He's a former student of mine and now a collaborator of mine. I probably mispronounced his name. I'm sorry, Gary. And anyways, we got a paper published. It's coming out in Phenomenology and Cognitive Science on relevance, realization, and personality. And then we were talking about how to extend this into attachment theory. And I was talking to him about the idea, like in Bowlby's sense, psychological attachment, and how it's so predictive of people. And what you were just talking about with the tornado was getting an optimal grip on the tornado, to use Merleau-Ponty, right? But in dialogos, right, we can reenact attachment because we're getting reciprocal optimal gripping going on. That's what attachment is. When my optimal grip on you is affording your optimal grip on me, which is right? And it affords mind-sight resonance, and it affords me indwelling you and internalizing you, and you indwelling me and internalizing me. That's what's happening when attachment is opening up. And that's why it's so informative of a person's entire, not just their thinking, right? Attachment goes into the very, like the very structures of your sense of self and your being in the world and your ability to be with others and be in relationship with others, right? It's this profound. And then I was thinking again about back when we saw, how do we thou the world? The difference between, right, tracking the tornado and tracking the coyote is, the coyote is not a tornado, right? The coyote, right, can be evading you and seeking things out, and right.
Yeah.
So, right. But when I thou the world, perhaps because let me. Dionysius has this model, right? But he's trying to talk about participatory knowing and he talks about we're like clay and God is the seal that rolls out on the clay, right?
Yeah.
It makes an impression,
Yeah.
right? And he's doing participatory knowing there because all of the images are aspects of the seal, but of
Yeah.
course none of them is the seal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And this says, right? But so it fits perfectly with what we're talking about. But he talks about that the clay has to be the right way, right?
Yeah.
And think about this. In that model,
Yeah.
he says, the clay is too soft, or it's too hard, or it's too watery, or it's not stable. So you got to get this receptivity, right? We have to get this receptivity so that the seal and the clay can optimally grip each other, right? It's a reciprocal gripping. So we talk about, that we fall in love with the logos in the logos.
Yeah.
But there's a psychological dimension I'm trying to point to here that I think we are activating and potentially reshaping people's attachment system. That's why they get this profound sense of intimacy, because what we're getting is reciprocal optimal gripping on each other, right? And this, and then that lifts up off, like we said, it's taken up from between people to between all of the people and reality. Reality is because when people describe the phenomenology of it, it's not just that they are sort of reaching into reality and getting a deeper and deeper grip, optimal grip, right? But they also feel like they're being grasped by the process, right?
There it is. There it is. Well, this is, of course, now I'm thinking not only thinking of tornadoes, but I'm also thinking about having this infant, right?
Exactly.
Which the whole thing is, I've been talking about this. In fact, you got on, you said, how you doing? I'm like, well, I'm in the process of coming in conformity with shitting and sleeping and crying and right. And then there's these moments of where it's this place where, okay, all of his needs are met, right? Mom's calm, he's calm, right? Like, and then we're all together and he goes, boop.
Yeah.
And then there's this kind of mind melding that goes on,
right?
That you can't not look at. And so, but what's interesting about this is that it's like 23 hours, the first 23 hours of the day are just this back and forth trying to get it right. Okay, what's he crying about? All right, it's okay. And he'll let you know by not crying, but then he'll start again. And then, in some sense, you're learning about him and he's finding out, I guess, his neurology is finding out that it has all its needs met. Thus, it's tied with our responsiveness, right? And that there's moments where it's not just him being calm, but it's I've noticed this, it's the whole thing coming together, right? It's calm. And then there's this other thing. It just doesn't, it's not just we all go to sleep, at least in that moment, but we're awake and we go, he just looks. And then you can't not look.
Yeah. And notice you're being grabbed, and notice what's happening in those moments. Those are attachment moments, right? Those are attachment formations.
Yeah.
You're not just mind melding, you're mind deducing. You're taking all this potential and you're drawing out a mind, right? And he's drawing your other. See, attachment, the attachment relation, when we can tap that system, because it's a mind making, person making system. When we trigger it in dialogos, we give people access to the fundamental machinery by which they can make a mind and make a person, and therefore engage in profound transformation.
Yes. Oh, interesting. This is really interesting. Okay, as we're talking about this, there's a kind of a the eidos. I keep seeing it jumping everywhere, it being nowhere in particular, and then it hovering in between things. But this back and forth. So then even in this dialogue, this back and forth, right? This back and forth and this catching. On some level, I've noticed that what's coming to mind is is that sense in which, usually I've noticed this with an insight, is similar. It's similar to the way that when you hear your own name in a crowd of people, all of a sudden everything stops, as if you've been listening for it the whole time, right? And you're like, oh, who called me, right?
Yep.
Even the faintest sound of your own name, it's as if there's an ear listening for it, right? At least that's the experience of it.
Yep.
And I'm getting this sense of like that something like that eidos, or that thing that's noticing the patterns, right, in between things of this back and forth, as if it's tracking it the whole time. And at a certain moment, it sees the figure, right? And
there's a cultivated receptivity. The Neoplatonists talked about this a lot. They talked about that the goal of a lot of their theurgical ritual practices was not to come to any propositional theory, but to create a proper state of receptivity in right relationship that will afford fundamental transformation. It's receptivity within right relationship that affords this kind of thing we're talking about. But it goes further. Because in Plato, there isn't a single eidos. Every eidos interpenetrates, right? Each eidos is also doing this with all the other eidoses. Nicholas of Cusa does this wonderful thing in the Vision of God. He actually sent the people he sent the treatise to. He also wrote dialogues, by the way. So did Erigena, right? At the beginning and the end, you got these great dialogues. But anyways,
Erigena wrote dialogues? I didn't know that.
The division of nature is one big dialogue between the student and the teacher. And it looks at initially like the teacher's always going to be the disclosure of truth, but as you go along, it
goes back and forth. Okay, got you. Oh, interesting.
So Cusa sent the people he was sending the Vision of God to, he sent them a picture that was popular at the time because perspective had just been invented. By the way, there's a really great book on Cusa called The Analogical Turn. I forget who the author is. And how Cusa is right on the cusp.
And Nicholas Cusa, he's the Neoplatonic theologian, philosopher from the Renaissance, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Gotcha.
He's in the 1400s.
Yeah.
Right. And so he's just after, perspective has been discovered. He's really pivotal because the author, I can't remember his name, and I apologize for that, but the analogical turn talks about how Cusa represents an alternative pathway that we could have taken rather than the pathway that came out of the discovery of perspective. Perspective was another psychotechnology, right? And it permeates our cognition. We think perspectively now, right? And we think that's natural. We even talk about first person, third person perspectives, but of course, the advent of perspective, right? Perspectival painting, and then how that gets enmeshed with nominalism. Cusa goes another way. Anyways, to go back to the point, so Cusa is a really pivotal figure. So he sent this picture, and the picture is it's a portrait, but it has this feature, and they were popular at the time. So no matter where you are, it looks like the picture is looking at you.
Oh, interesting. Oh,
right?
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay. And then what you can do is he says, no, I want you to do that. And then what I want you to do is both of you to move, like have more than one of you. And so, right, each one of you will say, the picture's looking at me, but you can hear the other person, think of dialogue. You can hear the other person saying, oh, but it's looking at me. Right? And then what you're supposed to get is the sense of the vision of God, which isn't your vision of God. It's that God is this trans-perspectival seeing that enters enters completely into intimacy with each, but is also right in relationship to all.
Oh, what a trip. What a trip.
So he gives this picture, and I'm working through the vision of God. I'm doing Lexio on it. And then you work your way through, what he does is he imaginally unfolds this. So notice what he does. He starts perceptually,
Yeah.
And then he moves to imagine. And notice how he makes use of the contrast between sight and hearing to get us beyond a
Right.
particular sense modality. And then he opens it up imaginally, and then he opens it up conceptually. And then you start to get right. And then the whole thing, right, is right, the dialogue between him and his brethren. Okay, so take that image.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. That's what each eidos is doing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Each eidos is right a way in which you can think of each eidos as a way in which I am being seen, but also as I could see, and how each one is also right intimate with me, but there's an all. So there's an eidos of the eidos. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Running through
Yes.
there's a trans-aspectuality, right? There's an eidos of all the eidos.
Right.
For
Yeah.
that's God. And for Plato, that's realness, intelligibility,
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah. Yes.
So do you see, when you
Yes.
get into dialogue, dialogos, you're coming into a state of mind that is dynamically receptive to be in right relationship, to conform to the dialogue within the eidos, between all the different eidos, so that you can track out the eidos of the eidos.
Huh. Wow.
Think about how we do that when we ask them, you did courage, you did wonder, you did love, but what is virtue itself?
There's that lift. Yeah.
And
there's
how
that lift.
how all the virtues interpenetrate and mutually define, depend on each other, and then they're lifted up.
Right. Right. And then there's that, and I'm getting that sense of just, what's kind of struck me is, I think it's because we were talking about Akusa. Well, isn't this with the when Christ comes back?
Yes.
Right. In some sense, that you can imagine that's like getting the God's eye view.
That's the great promise. That's the great promise. So in Paul's hymn to agape, right? Now I show you the most excellent way. He ends it with, "We will know as we are known. Now we see as in a mirror darkly, but we will know as we are known." Right.
And there's that faith.
Yes.
Right. There's that faith. God, the whole thing just gets this sense of it outframes all of my captivating it. Right? It pops out, but like when it pops out, there's a realization of what I was just trying to grasp about, of it being beyond ourselves, but the understanding of that beyondness is itself up here. Right now I'm understanding it. This kind of, this, yes.
And this is one of the things that's in the Platonic tradition, but Christianity made well. And this hit me. I think I mentioned this before, but I keep coming back to this because it was profound, right? I think it's in one of his letters. Spinoza says, God does not have any abstract ideas. Of course he doesn't, because he's, right? He goes to the very essential core of everything. He is the most intimate. Right. So what we have to remember, you rise out of the cave, right? You go up if you can't take it back down into intimate, right? Conflict ridden interact, right?
Yeah.
Somehow, right? And this is what is so promising about Dialogos.
Yeah.
Because simultaneously it feels like the abstraction.
Yes.
But it also feels like intimacy, deep intimacy. So you don't get the normal opposition between intimacy and abstraction. You get them somehow synoptically integrated, stereoscopically seen through, like the vision of God.
Right. Oh, so interesting.
Anyways, that's sort of the gestalt of what I
you just took me on a total ride. Wow. Well, you know, to kind of then, I think that what's lingering for me about this is something in revisiting Ponte lately.
Yes. Yeah.
His notion of reversibility,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And particularly, and it really has to do with, I didn't realize how much Ponte had to do with imagination, right?
Yeah. So Dan Chiappi and I are going to be, like, Dan and I have been published. We published like 3 papers. Well,
Yeah.
2, and the third is probably going to be published.
Have you had him on any videos, Dan?
You know, he doesn't really want to do that, I think. That's my
Okay.
sense.
Okay, got you. So I haven't
Yeah.
met him then.
No, you haven't met him, but we're reading the preface and some chunks of the Phenomenology Perception, because we're going to read Merleau-Ponty's The Visible and the Invisible, and
Right.
how
Okay.
much the imaginal is the bridge between them. Yeah.
Yeah. And in this way, that's interesting. I was reading and I was like, I don't know if Ponte read Corbin. I mean, I would imagine he must have, but he doesn't. I don't know if he mentions him. But he's
There's no,
got the very same sense of
yeah,
not imagination, but the
right.
imaginal enactment, particularly in perception. And this is, see if I can I can get it. That the imaginal is something like has to do with this connection between, it's like the invisible lining of the visible in perception.
Yes.
Right? It's this place where something like reversibility happens, and it has to do with this sense in which how, like, I was thinking about this, like, so from the world's perspective, my seeing, right, is the sun, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But from the eye's perspective, the world is like the sun,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And but yet this understanding of the world, right, in some sense is given by this sun, and there's something that goes on that reverses, like we're constantly reversing it, this sense of reversibility, right?
Yes.
And Ponte picks up on this reversibility, and he's like, there's no, he couldn't find any language that really, I think, that accounted for that. And so the word he started to come up with was this notion of ontological flesh.
Yes.
And I don't know if I quite understand it, but you can really get this sense of, like, when you put your hands together, right? And you go, okay, now feel how, which hand is touching which hand. Now you can feel your right hand touching your left hand, right?
Yeah,
see
the left. Yes.
But then, okay, now, like, the other way around, and they're happening, they're back and forth, they're back and forth, they're back and forth. This back and forthness, he's saying, is something like happening in every perception.
I agree, and I think that's the phenomenological basis for Platonic anagoge.
Okay. Yeah.
I've got to read it more. Yeah, but the thing about the imaginal, let's do,
Yeah.
like, so when the child picks up the stick and puts the blanket on in order to become a pirate,
Yeah.
like, or no,
Yeah.
in order to become Zorro. Let's do it specific. Zorro, here's my cape and here's my sword.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Notice that, right? It's the imaginal is enacted. It's right. The child is selecting from all of the potential aspects of the piece of wood and the blanket, and they're doing it imaginally, right? They're imaginally opening up. So what's happening here? One way of thinking about the metaphor I've been using, analogy, you know what a heads-up display is in a cockpit for a pilot? Okay, so you don't want to be, when you're in the middle of a dogfight, you don't want to be looking down at your instruments, because then you're dead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
What they do is they have a projector that projects onto the windshield.
Oh, yeah.
Right. All of these things. So, right, the pilot can be looking through the windshield at the world, but can be noticing patterns in the world.
There it is.
Right.
There it is. Yeah.
This is called augmented reality. And if you played Pokemon Go, you've done it with your phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Augmented reality. Now, here's the idea. we can use imagination to
Yeah.
augment reality. We can do
Right.
imaginally augmented reality. And I
Right.
think this, right, and Schindler makes this clear, right? This is where you start to get, because Plato has this
Huh.
weird,
Huh.
ambiguous relationship to imagery, right?
Yeah.
To images. He oh, get rid of them, and then he uses them all over the place, right? Like just the Republic
Yeah.
itself is imaginal. The whole Republic is imaginal, right?
Yeah.
And what Schindler argues is that Plato is not engaging in a performative contradiction. Plato basically wants you to relate to images neither transparently nor opaquely,
Yeah.
but translucently. He wants you to
Yes.
look through them,
Through.
and so you can do the imaginal augmentation
Right.
of reality realization, if I can put it that way.
Right. Right.
Now, I think the place where we do that in a highly coordinated fashion, so
Mhm.
we can pick up on those patterns that are most sacred to us,
Mhm.
it's religion. Religion is the serious play
Hmm.
with imaginally augmented reality, so that we can pick up the most profound patterns of
Yes.
anagoge that are capable,
Right.
that we're
Right.
capable of.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
like you get that. You do this, and you've been doing it a lot recently. The face,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
face, the face is imaginal for us.
Yeah.
You're not really looking at the person's soul, but you are.
Yes.
Wittgenstein
Right.
previously said, what other image would you have of a person's soul other than their face?
Their face.
But of course, their
Yeah.
face is not their
Yeah.
soul. Yet
Yeah.
somehow
You look through it.
you look through it by
Yeah.
means of it and
Yeah.
beyond of it. And right.
Yeah.
And when you are, not only when you are optimally gripping, but when they through their face can optimally grip you, when they can catch and grasp your attention.
Right.
Right. Then
Right.
you get then you get the reciprocal opening, and then you
Right.
get the sense, oh, now I'm doing the eidetic induction. I'm being drawn into this person as they're
Yes.
being drawn out into me.
Yes. and then there's this process of this other thing that we pop out of and find ourselves in, and we go, oh my God, that thing that just happened, right? The
Yes.
realization of the unity through all of that, which wasn't a thing.
Well, but that's I've been thinking about that too.
Yeah.
Because you've been doing that pop out thing a lot.
Yeah.
There's a second dimension to facing, and we capture it in this slightly, it's not totally separate, but it's a different meaning. When we talk about facing something,
Yes.
like
Oh,
you better
yes.
face up. You better face up to your future, young man. You
Right.
better face. So there's this sense also, right?
Oh.
Not only of this, but of confrontation.
Yeah.
Right. Of, whoa, I just faced something. Right.
Face something.
Yes.
And then come to terms with it.
Yes, exactly.
Seems to be the same kind of movement. Like you face it and then you come to terms with it. And the terms is
another way
that's
of facing
really
it.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, because
Yeah.
we talk about when we want somebody to confront it, to allow themselves to really see into it and really be affected by it. You better face this. You're not facing up to this. You better, right? And we talk about, right, turning around and facing a different direction, and all of this stuff around this centrally enacted imaginal entity.
Yeah. That's why somebody says, who's it? I think it was an American, was a poet. Someone said, you've earned the face that you have by the time you hit 40. Right?
Oh, that's very good. I like that.
Because there is this element, like by the time you've done that enough times, you'll see basically you've earned the face that you have. Whoever's there is the one we can go, yep, that in some sense your face also carries with it. That's why it's so meaningful. It's like your face carries with it all of the facing, right?
All of the facing.
And the coming to terms with it and speaking it and coming to terms with it. Yeah. And it articulates it. Right.
And we have it in metaphor, but not quite as starkly. But there's other cultures where there's something like the phenomena of losing face, that you lose the ability, right, to to be regarded or treated as a person.
Right.
But imagine if we could, and I'm now trying to deeply invoke both meanings.
Yeah.
And you can, for some reason, Rilke's coming to mind. Right.
Mhm.
But imagine if we could face everything.
Mm.
Imagine if we could get into this, but also the confrontation, the both senses of facing. Imagine what it would be like if we could face everything.
Yeah. Okay. I just got it. Not just facing you, but actually almost like a verb, facing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like
when
I'm looking at faces me. I face it.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, they go both ways.
Yeah.
They go both ways. There's that reversibility. Yeah.
Yes. In both this, right? But also, so the anagogic reciprocal opening, but also the otherness and the way it can challenge you and be beyond you.
Right.
And you need to go through a radical transformation in order to face it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, he was Rilke.
And think about again how dialectic into dialogos is just enacting all of this.
Yeah. It's so I'm this sense of, so I'm reading I think it's is it Wolfson is his last name? He's
it's
the Jewish, the Jewish theologian, mystical Kabbalah,
right.
Very, very, very influenced by Heidegger and the Continentalists and stuff. He's amazing, and he keeps, I think one of the things that I'm finding is baffling, the way he talks about this sense of veiling, right? Because he's talking a lot about this in terms of this is really interesting, the way he, now I don't know if I'm getting this wrong. I don't have any reference point for this because I don't know Hebrew, but I'm just struck by both through talking with Zevi and him, and how like fundamental for my understanding of the Kabbalah and in the Hebrew point of view about mysticism is this unity of sound and language all the way down to the alphabet, where the alphabet, the beginning, middle, and last letter are the three senses of time.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that and how one both disclose and closes, and it reveals and hides each other back and forth. And language is this such sounding out, does this back and forth thing throughout the whole thing, right? And that this sense of preserving concealedness when you speak. So it's like they in Wilson, I think, really is trying to get at this in multiple ways, as far as I can tell. This sense that picking up on I guess Heidegger's insight is like, whereas kind of metaphysics in some sense tries to reveal the whole thing, but they paradoxically don't notice that they conceal it, right? By trying to reify, right, the thing that they see, they completely conceal the thing that they see, right?
There's supposed to be,
and
this is why for me Plotinus is so central. There's supposed to be, right, but also Erigena and Cusa. There's supposed to be an ongoing, permanent dialogue between mysticism and metaphysics.
Yep. And well, I think, wouldn't you say that that's Descartes formalized, right? Precisely the philosophy or metaphysics being something that doesn't need to check anymore with the mystics.
Exactly right.
In some sense, right?
It comes to culmination in him that transformation is replaced by method. So we do not have to, we do not because all thinking is propositional, we do not have to go through participation
Yeah.
in transformation in order to get the disclosure of certain kinds
Right.
of truths. All
Right.
we need is a universal method that can be universally applied and does
Right.
not require any transformation from us other than the learning and practice of the method.
Yeah.
Yes.
So basically, I say Descartes said, "Well, thanks, mystics, we got it now.
Yeah,
We wrote down everything we said. You said we don't need to look anymore. We got it now. Let's."
and that's because the university had been separated from the monastery now
Yeah.
by a century or more. There'd been the Titanic bloodshed
Yeah.
of 30 years war, the religious wars, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's totally appropriate to criticize Descartes, but it's also, I think, incumbent upon us to realize why he made the moves he made. I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost like it's hard to see what a brilliant mind like his would do other than that within the historical,
Yeah.
social, historical, cultural context he was in.
Right. Right.
But we are no longer in that context. We are very far from it. And so
Yeah.
we now need to change. It's
Yeah.
funny when you were bringing up the Hebrew tradition, I thought you were going to go a different way.
Mhm.
But what you said, it was actually constant because I was reminded of Elijah.
Mm.
And I think Zevi talked about it in one of our talks. It's one of my
Mhm.
favorite passages in the Old Testament.
Mm.
Elijah has just called down fire from heaven and killed all the prophets, the 400 prophets of Baal. You'd think he'd be really sort of like, hey, I'm on
Yeah.
top of it.
Yeah.
Instead, Ahab and especially Jezebel, the queen,
Yeah.
are seeking to kill him. And so he flees into the wilderness
Yeah.
and he starts to complain about how, woe is me, self-pity.
Yeah.
Interesting how the Hebrew Bible really is happy to portray the flaws of even the greatest people.
Yeah.
It's one of its
Yeah.
great signposts of its sacredness.
Yeah.
And basically then God sort of calls him to come out. And then there's like this huge earthquake. And then and the text says, but God's not in the earthquake. Very, very interesting thing to say, by the way. And then there's a huge whirlwind that's sort of like tearing the mountain apart. But God's not in the whirlwind. And Elijah's just watching all that. And then there's a sheer silence. And Elijah covers his face.
Oh, whoa. Oh,
Because
interesting.
that carried the presence of God. Even though all of this Bronze Age display of divine power actually did not convey the presence of God. The sheer silence. It's funny because there's many translations. Some translations are sheer silence. Others are the still small voice. Like again, it's how can a voice be still? What does that mean? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's this thing that happened, and then the facing thing. He has to cover his face because he's going to be overwhelmed as he attempts to face it. And it's not something he can see. It is only something he can hear, but his hearing is really not hearing. It's hearing the boundaries of his hearing made pregnant and salient to him.
Wow.
Yeah, it's one of the Old Testament is such a hard book for me. I mean, the whole Bible is a hard book.
Yeah. How so? What's the thing that's hard?
I'm only talking about how I see it. And of course, I was biased in how I see it because I was brought up in a Christian tradition that sort of was very patronizing and condescending to Jews and to Hebrew interpretation of the Old Testament. So I want to that bias is clearly at work in me. But the thing is, when you're reading the Old Testament, this is how I've come to see it. You see the tension between, there are pre-axial Bronze Age ideas of God, and then there's axial age revolution ideas of God. And they're being, so think about the context of what I just told you. What's the story that came just before that? A contest of the gods. So Elijah goes out and all the prophets of Baal, and he basically challenges them to a wizard's duel. Let's make a sacrifice. You pray to your gods, and if they can come fire, then I'll worship. But if I call down fire, then you have to worship Yahweh, right? And they pray all day and nothing's happening. And he actually ridicules them and makes fun of them. And it's like something out of Homer. It's like a battle between the gods. It's a wizard's duel. There's ridicule going on, and then they fail, and then he prays, and fire from heaven falls, and it burns it all up. And I think they then all the people present witnessing then kill all the prophets of Baal. It's a bloody, violent display, and it's just a test of power and glory. Like it's Bronze Age, thoroughly Bronze Age. And then right after it, literally right after it, is this axial age story that I just told you about the sheer silence, right beside each other, and you just go like this.
Wow.
And
Interesting.
and I was brought up like we just sort of read the Bible, and I remember I read the Bible, it's like 7 times, and you just pass from one to the other, and now upon reflection, it's like I wonder, it must have been ignorance. I had no other, how I could move so smoothly from one to the other, because they're right now they slap me in the they slap me in the face. Right? It's like it's like
right. In some sense, you could, it's funny because when you I don't know that much about the Bible. I don't have a background in it. So even those stories are relatively new to me. But like so when you talked about it, I did get this sense of like, oh yeah, this is very familiar. But and then when you talked about the still small voice and then the covering of his face, I got this sense of like, in some sense, in that story, it seems like, and especially during that time, right, you can almost feel the emerging of the insights, right, of the axial age kind of coming through in that, like the intuition of it, the very, very beginning sense of, wait a minute, what's the common thing through all of this? If I actually perceive it, right, I can no longer be who I am, right? Because I need to be like this to see it like this and respond as normal. But if I see this, I'm going to end up in a different place.
Yes.
That's the shame.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's the in the Alcibiades, Socrates talks about how you see yourself in the image in the other person's pupil. And that's why we call it the pupil, because you can study, right?
Yeah.
And all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, the idea that to hear God is to be drawn out of oneself, like we talked. It's a call to a radical transformative conformity that discloses to you your inadequacies, your sins, the ways in which you have fallen into self-deception, the way you have where you have failed to live up to the call to be who you should be, and all of that is like suddenly thrust upon him.
Right.
It's like I said, it's a strange, wonderful book, and terrible book in the original sense. Like when you read the Old Testament, and what's really interesting, and I forget who was it, Finkelstein? I can't remember who commented on this. It's a Jewish theologian about the disappearance of God. So God walks around and talks to people, very Bronze Age. And then as you go through the Old Testament, God withdraws and withdraws and withdraws and withdraws. And he only speaks once, maybe twice in the New Testament. He seems to speak perhaps to Joseph in a dream and to Mary, although that's also an angel. And then, but there's when Jesus is baptized, that's the one time where the voice of God is heard again. And so this withdrawal of God, right?
Totally.
Which reminds me of those. So the Bible as a whole is doing those two stories. You've got, the fire from heaven, and God is super present. And then you get the withdrawal into the sheer silence.
And isn't it set up in Christianity where like the New Testament is actually in some sense a dialogue or in response with the Old Testament. It's like Adam right? Adam is now
That's-
rebirthed
yeah,
as Jesus, like that. There's these kind of parallels. Isn't that kind of like the
yes. So
dialectic between the Old and New Testament that continually goes on?
from a Christian point of view, obviously a
Right.
Jew wouldn't say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was reading, I think it's Laird's book, Lectio Divina. He wrote a series of books on silence and the contemplative life.
Mm.
But he talks about how in that silence, we go from the image of God to the likeness of God, right?
Yeah.
Which is this really, and so that's sort of how the relationship between the New Testament and the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, we are in the image of God, but then that is moved into the likeness of God.
Right. Right.
God likeness. So
Right.
we go through the metanoia that exapts, to use my language, the image of God into this ongoing right anagoge of agape.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's that sense of just the thing, the image that you evoked with that, in some sense, that and God, right, spoke. It's not this, it's not that, right? But it's in this sense of hearing the limits of what he understood up till that point is beyond that is what God, that sense of not that. God, I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time.
Because notice what God is trying, this sounds
please.
On behalf of God, but instead of showing Elijah his power in order to comfort him, he actually tries to provoke metanoia in Elijah, almost like Socratic aporia.
Totally.
Right? What he's trying to do is reorient, and Elijah will go back to his mission after this experience.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So instead of giving him the power that he seeks, I suppose, this is something I'm trying to draw out from the scripture. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. But what happens in the encounter with God is instead the radical metanoia. And then what a Christian would say is that, what Jesus is doing is trying to make metanoia through agape a way of life rather than a one-time event.
Yes. Wow. And I can just hear this thing of just the turn of the logos realizing itself, falling into an image of itself, losing itself, coming back in as separate, a conversation, realizing itself, but this kind of but then when it comes back, and here's the thing I think that you're talking about with all the levels of like spatially, right? Imaginally, right? And conceptually, and then dialogos. With each of these is kind of, in some sense, you can see it going back and forth until one penetrates the other, which affords, it's also, it's an evolving, right? And
that's the key thing in Erigena.
Yeah.
It's not emanation and emergence.
Yeah.
It's emanation emergence. Complete interpenetration.
Yeah. Oh, so you can kind of see that in the evolution from the image of God, right? To what was the other one?
The likeness.
The likeness of God, right? So it's like, you could see, it's like, you'd have to see the image to then come into conformity, right?
Exactly.
And then we realize a likeness back.
Exactly.
Right.
When you exact the image so that you can transform into increasing conformity with God, that's when you pass into God likeness. That's actually the translation of a term that Plato uses throughout the Republic. Right? God likeness. We become more and more like God. Right. And this is perhaps a little bit heretical, but Jesus promises that his followers will do greater things than him, and that they will also be sons, and I would add daughters of God. And I'm sort of pointing that verse out as a little bit, I think, uncomfortable for sort of Orthodox Christians. But it's clear. I mean, I'm rereading I'm rereading the New Testament. I'm rereading the New Testament. And I'm doing that by reading a new translation by David Bentley Hart.
Oh yeah, which is it's directly from the Greek, and he's trying to stay as loyal to the Greek as possible, right?
He knows the Greek. He's Eastern Orthodox. He knows Neoplatonism through and through. Like
Yeah, he's
coming
brilliant.
yeah, he's brilliant. And you encounter these verses that like, wow, Jesus just said we will do more than he ever did. And like, how are we supposed to understand that given sort of traditional Christian ideas?
Yeah,
And I don't know what to say. And I'm not trying to disparage
Yeah.
Christian faith. I don't do that. I don't want to do that. But
right.
there's something about this, right? That
Yes.
right.
Right. And then the dot, like this kind of thing that just immediately, the moment you do this, you're in a different relationship. What does that relationship connotate, right? Like
Okay,
then
yeah.
it comes into dialogue, this sense of, and you can just imagine it's like, yeah, then we see the thing that we have to become and seeing it, and then we see it, and then boom, we get a new face, and then we see another, and then we come into dialogue, right? And this popping, transforming, reorganizing the whole thing. This is great, John.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. Like I said, I bounced it off Jordan.
Yeah.
I bounced it off you. I actually I'd like a copy of this.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm going to release the video where I do this with Jordan, and then I do it with you, and then
Yeah.
maybe I'll do one with Chris.
Yeah.
And then sort of do eidetic deduction on eidetic induction.
And then maybe we should all do it together. Then we'll get together,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, my friend, I have to keep going.
Me too. This is perfect. Great.
All right.
Great place for closure.
Bye.
Take good care. Bye-bye.